There's the reason why. In his case, he said, I'm a pilot. I don't want to wear that again on my chest. But Frederick developed the Type L camera. Brilliant mind. So what you have also in the legacy of the British is this amazing individual, John Theodore Cuthbert Moore Brabazon. He was the pioneer for British aviation. He won the first aerial race in Britain. He flew one of the first airplanes in Britain. He was a motor car race car guy like Eddie Rickenbacker. He led the team that developed the A-type camera and photographic processing. He basically led all things British for the most part on aerial reconnaissance and photography. He developed the manuals by which they were able to apply the analysis. After the war, he became a member of Parliament and became a Lord. I'm going to have the pleasure of meeting his grandson in a few weeks, who just retired from the House of Lords. And I want to be able to find out firsthand what kind of guy he was. But Moore Brabazon is one of those heroes that kind of overlooked. Eugène Pépin is the French analytical genius that basically puts it all together for the French military. What you find with Pépin is the ability to take all the information that comes from aerial reconnaissance and package it. He was so incredibly important that the French staff basically had him be part of Pershing's staff just so that Pershing would understand the intelligence process. And during the Meuse-Argonne, it was Pépin that basically led the intelligence process for the Americans. One great figure in photography beyond his war years is Edward Steichen. Steichen was the lead American in 1918 for developing the aerial reconnaissance process. What you see with Ed Steichen is somebody who's incredibly passionate, hardworking and such, but he was respected by his peers because he was untouchable. If you go buy a book on Steichen, you'll see photography that's basically looked upon as some of the best in the 20th century. In this case, interesting, he's carrying a German-made handheld camera. But he understood photography probably better than anybody else in the American forces. We're getting close to the end. Paul Louis Weyler is another unsung hero. This man developed the aerial reconnaissance force for the French. By what I mean by developing is he understood the process of artillery regulation. He understood how to improve on it. He was able to lead. He was an incredibly brave person. Look at his chest there. He's got a Croix de Guerre with 11 palms. He's got the Legion of Honor. He got the Military Cross from the Brits for a few weeks that he did with them in Italy. On and on and on. Paul Louis Weyler was Jewish. After the war, he took over the Nome aircraft factory. And because of the problems in the interwar years, obviously he was industry. He had a lot of issues with labor and such. So basically, his reputation kind of soured. But from a military perspective, he was untouchable. Many years ago, when I was trying to get introduced to Paul Louis Weyler, I Googled his name. The only thing that came up was the fact that at one time, he was one of the world's richest men, and he owned one of the world's largest diamonds. So, and by the way, he lived to 100. And if it makes you feel any better, he was a good friend of Richard Nixon. On the downward slope, what you find in terms of the understanding of aerial reconnaissance is the full circle. The God's eye view, you need to understand what information means so you can make effective decisions. One of the saddest legacies of stories of the 20th century is Pétain, because Pétain was probably the greatest French general in the First World War. The sad thing is, he lived too long. If he had died after World War I, he'd be interred with Foch and Napoleon in the Invalides. Instead, he lived too long, he became Hitler's toady and basically ran Vichy France. But he understood what was necessary to acquire the information and how to protect the resources to conduct the right operations. So Pétain is an unsung hero, but at the same time, he was his own worst enemy. And then the end of the story from the standpoint of our discussion here is Foch. Because Foch was a supreme Allied commander. And towards the end of the war, he employed Weyler, in terms of the Weyler group, an elite force of brigades that would fly the Army strategical area on a daily basis. And from that analysis of what was going on out in the hinterlands, they were able to determine areas that would be built up for a potential German operation. And based on that, Foch made decisions on how they were going to conduct the operations in the last few months of the war. So, is this here you have some, let's face it, when you get guys in the photographic expertise, everybody does their power, what's the word for these guys? Anyway, what you have is a 50 centimeter, and all the folks that do the work with the camera showing you really what is the true system that was important for aerial reconnaissance. In this case, their camera. And I'll conclude on my best friend from Great War is Sergeant Hello, and he was with the Escadrille 69, and he's got that 120 centimeter camera. When I gave this talk at the Air Force Academy, a cadet asked me, he says, "Is that a ray gun?" And I said, "All right, you're on your way." So, and that's the book, second edition. And I hope you find time to look at it and comment, and look forward to chat with you throughout the day. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Terry. We do have a few minutes for questions. Got a question in the back.
I am grateful. I've been hacking away with this pollen for the last several days, and it didn't hack once, so thank you for having to endure.
In the previous talk, there was mention of some aerial reconnaissance efforts prior to World War I.
Yes.
Can you fill any details in on those?
Gladly. If you read my second edition, the first chapter talks about Italy. The Turco-Italian War of 1911-1912 did just that. It captured all the key missions in that particular conflict. Reconnaissance, they took a camera along, they had a BB camera that they photographed. They terrorized the natives with low-level flying. They conducted artillery adjustment for the Italian Navy off the coast of Tripoli. They did a lot, and they did that all in Blériot's. So, and by the way, one fabulous source that I didn't know anything about that is available on Google is your flight aero journal that starts from 1909 to today. And you can just type in a keyword and poof, up comes a laundry list of all the articles that contain that particular. That's how I learned about Henderson. And I learned about the Turco-Italian War. So it's so amazing what you can get now through the right search mechanisms. Yes?
We can take one more before break.
Down in front.
Here we are.
You talked about the role of aerial reconnaissance
Yep.
photography in terms of the land war, but in terms of the sea war, was it used to any extent and of any great importance?
Well, the Royal Navy obviously had concerns with the coastal lines. So it was their responsibility to photograph those defenses and so on. When they did the Zeebrugge attack in Belgium, where they basically, it was an incredible operation to basically sink a couple of British ships in the middle of the harbor so that the Germans couldn't use that for transfer. All that was acquired from the Royal Naval Air Service. When the Royal Air Force was built, they took the Royal Naval Air Service and the Royal Flying Corps resources and put them together under a separate service, the Royal Air Force, which is the 1st of April, 1918. That's when they came together. Does that answer your question?
Terry, thank you very much.
Cheers.